You know how it is. You're busy, right? Got a ton of articles bookmarked, tabs open with research, maybe even some notes scribbled down. The thing is, sifting through it all to get to the real gems, the stuff that really changes how you think, how you work, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's where we come in with the deep dive. We do the heavy lifting, extract the insights that actually make a difference. Think of it as your fast track to being seriously in the know. And in today's deep dive, we're going deep on Steven Bartlett's book, The Diary of a CEO.
And we've got some really juicy excerpts here, just to give you an idea of the kind of minds that have praised this book. Simon Sinek, Gary Vaynerchuk, Robert Greene, Jay Shetty, Marie Forleo, these are people who've really shaped how we think about business, about personal growth.
Right, heavy hitters. And Bartlett's not just talking the talk. I mean, this guy has built successful companies, multiple companies. We're talking over $1 billion in cumulative valuation at their peaks.
Yeah, he's not messing around.
Not at all. Right now, he is at the helm of Flight Story, Third Web, and Flight Fund. So he's operating at a really high level. And these insights, straight from the trenches.
Now, the book itself is really thoughtfully laid out, broken down into these core pillars. We're going to be looking at a few of these with a real focus on the self, but also touching on the idea and the team. Today is all about building out your mental toolkit with Bartlett's insights, understanding yourself, your motivations, your beliefs, but also how to create compelling ideas, build strong teams. Each principle might seem kind of standalone, but they all feed into this bigger picture of living and working more effectively.
All right, let's get into it, shall we? First up, the self. And there's this key idea of filling your 5 buckets in the right order. So what are these buckets exactly?
Well, Bartlett talks about 5 interconnected elements: knowledge, skills, network, resources, and reputation. And the really important thing is the order they usually develop in, from left to right. You've got to ditch the get-rich-quick mentality and really build that base first, the knowledge and skills. It's like the launch pad for everything else.
It's kind of intuitive, right? Knowledge comes first, like what you pick up from school, from just learning, reading. How does that then turn into skills, the next bucket?
Yeah, that's it. Knowledge is just the starting point. It's when you actually use it, put it to work, that it turns into a skill. You might know the theory of riding a bike, but until you hop on and pedal, it's just theory.
So then these skills, they make you valuable professionally, right?
Exactly. You have actual useful knowledge and skills, and boom, people want you on their team. That's how your network grows, the third bucket. People are naturally drawn to those who bring something to the table.
Right. You've got the knowledge, the skills, your network's expanding. How does that then lead to resources?
That's where the magic happens. With a solid network, built on that strong base of knowledge and skills, you get access to things you wouldn't have otherwise. We're talking funding, partnerships, mentors, even whole new career avenues.
And finally, reputation. That kind of comes naturally when you've built the other 4 the right way.
That's the idea, yeah. If you're consistently investing in your knowledge, honing your skills, cultivating that network, and getting the resources, a strong reputation follows.
Now, Bartlett really hammers home this order thing. What happens when you try to shortcut the process?
Yeah, he warns against the whole I want it all now mentality, especially when it comes to money, before you've actually put in the work on knowledge and skills. He tells this story about Richard, this super smart 21-year-old guy who gets offered a CEO gig in New York. Way more money, equity, the whole shebang. It's that shiny object syndrome.
Ah, that's so tempting, right? Especially early on. But what's the problem with skipping those foundational steps?
Bartlett says things happen, right? He calls them professional earthquakes. You can lose your network, your resources, even your reputation can take a hit. But the 2 things that stick with you, the 2 buckets that no one can really take away, are your knowledge and your skills. He calls them the cornerstones of your professional life, the clearest predictor of your future.
So the message is, be patient. Focus on building that core of knowledge and ability first. Everything else will follow. And he has a specific law about this, right?
He does. The law. Fill your 5 buckets in the right order. Applied knowledge is skill, creating value that leads to a growing network, abundant resources, and a robust reputation. And then he's got this killer quote. Those who hoard gold have riches for a moment. Those who hoard knowledge and skills have riches for a lifetime. True prosperity is what you know and what you can do.
That's a powerful one. Okay, on to the second concept from the self. To master it, you must create an obligation to teach it. Sounds like a cool way to learn more deeply.
Right. It's all about the idea that teaching something is the best way to solidify your own understanding, to become a master at it. Bartlett points out that a lot of the world's greatest thinkers have kind of intuitively used this technique.
And this is something you've experienced personally, right? You've talked about a pretty big transformation in your own public speaking journey.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I remember being 14, standing on stage at some school awards thing, and totally freezing up, like completely blanking. It was mortifying. Fast forward maybe 10 years, and I'm speaking on global stages, sharing the platform with people like Barack Obama week after week. It was a whole different ballgame.
That's a huge shift. And you say that change was because of this simple law of teaching. How did that work for you?
Well, for me, social media played a big part, especially Twitter, with that tiny character limit. You had to cram big ideas into these little spaces, so it forced me to really break it down, understand the core of what I wanted to say. And that act of simplifying, being able to explain something clearly, it's not just about communicating to others, it's about testing your own understanding. If you can make it simple, you truly get it.
Makes sense. It's easy to hide behind jargon and all that if you're not really sure about something.
Exactly. And Bartlett talks about this Feynman technique, named after the physicist Richard Feynman. This guy was known for explaining these super complex scientific ideas in ways that were so simple, even a kid could understand. He said, I couldn't reduce it to the freshman level. That means we really don't understand it. If you can't simplify it, you haven't really grasped the core of it.
So whether it's a tweet or explaining something to someone who's totally new to it, that act of teaching forces you to get clear.
Totally. It's like being able to simplify and share an idea. It's both the path to mastery and the proof you've reached it.
All right, let's move on to the third concept from the self. You must never disagree. Now, in a world where we're supposed to have debates and different opinions, this sounds kind of strange.
Yeah, it does, and Bartlett gets that. He starts by talking about his mom. He remembers her having these never-ending arguments with his dad, and it got him thinking about how we communicate effectively, the whole science behind it.
So that led him to talking with a neuroscientist.
It did. He talked to Tali Sherrod, a professor at both UCL and MIT. She does research using brain imaging, looking at how our brains react when we disagree. Specifically, she was looking at how people evaluate financial things. What they found was kind of wild. When people agreed, their brains showed more openness, and they were way more confident in their judgments. But when they disagreed, their brains basically shut down, becoming way less open to the other person's view.
Like disagreement creates a mental block.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. And it might explain why in things like climate change, where there's all this evidence piling up, people still don't change their minds. Starting with disagreement might just make it harder for your argument to land, no matter how good it is.
That's interesting. So it's not about hiding your own views, but more about being smart in how you start a conversation.
Exactly. Bartlett says the key is to begin with finding some common ground, some area of agreement. That makes it way more likely that people will actually listen to your logic and your evidence. And his law about this is, to never disagree is a critical skill for negotiation, speaking, sales, leadership, writing, and partnerships. And he puts it nicely in this quote, our words should be bridges to comprehension, not barriers to connection. Disagree less, understand more.
Okay, the next one from the self is a bit of a mind bender. You do not get to choose what you believe. That suggests we don't have as much control over our own minds as we might think.
Yeah, it's deep, right? Bartlett says that our beliefs are rooted in what we see as primary evidence. But the thing is, whether that evidence is actually true or not, that's not what makes us believe it. It's more about our own interpretation of that evidence based on our own experiences,
And he uses a really personal example to make this point, doesn't he?
He does. He asks you to think about someone you love deeply, and then to actually list the evidence that supports that love shared memories, how you feel when you're with them, how they act towards you. All that stuff, those subjective experiences, that's what makes you believe in that love. And then he gives some examples of things that lots of people believe but might not actually be true, like flat earth theory or even Santa Claus. The point is, it's not about the objective truth. It's about how strongly we believe in the evidence we have.
So our personal experiences are what really shape our beliefs.
Totally. And that's why when you're trying to teach someone something new, it's important to connect with their senses, their surroundings. Like with climate change, people who advocate for it try to show how it's affecting people locally, letting them see it happening around them.
And this ties back to his talk with Tali Sherrod.
Yeah. She says to change someone's beliefs, you got to work with how the brain works, not against it. Attacking someone's beliefs usually backfires. The better way is to give them new evidence that resonates with them and then highlight the positive things that could happen if they change their view. Giving people new firsthand experiences is a great way to create belief change, even when those beliefs are really stubborn.
He also shares some personal examples about his own beliefs changing.
He does. He talks about moving from religious belief to agnosticism, from low self-esteem to believing in himself, and even going from fearing public speaking to being comfortable with it. In every case, he says it was new evidence that he found convincing that changed things. His key point here: beliefs are stubborn, but they are malleable. To change a belief, a person must find a way to attain convincing new evidence that they can trust. Don't attack it, make them a direct witness to positive new evidence.
This fifth concept is pretty interesting. You must lean in to bizarre behavior. Before we get to leaning in, what does leaning out mean in this context?
Well, leaning out, according to Bartlett, isn't just being wrong about something. It's more like being so sure you're right that you refuse to even consider new information, especially if it's unconventional or goes against what you already believe. It's overconfidence, basically.
And he gives some pretty big historical examples of this, right?
Oh, yeah, like the CEO who completely dismissed digital music, or Clifford Stoll, who wrote this article in Newsweek back in 1995 saying online databases would never replace newspapers. Talk about aging poorly. Then there's the bank president in 1903 who said the automobile was just a fad, Intel CEO Andy Grove, who didn't believe in personal communicators, and of course Steve Ballmer, the Microsoft CEO, laughing at the iPhone.
Those are some pretty big misses, and he's got a personal story about this too.
Yeah. He talks about meeting with this big fashion brand back in 2012. They completely dismissed social media marketing, even though it was getting pretty big. Well, his company, which was all about social media, went on to do really well, and that fashion brand filed for bankruptcy in 2019.
So leaning out is basically about resisting change, dismissing new ideas, even when there's evidence popping up. What's the psychology behind that?
Bartlett brings up cognitive dissonance. You know, that uncomfortable feeling you get when you come across something that contradicts your belief, your image of yourself, your confidence. Research shows that this dissonance is especially strong when it challenges how we see ourselves. And because of that discomfort, we reject anything that opposes our views. We lean out of new information just to protect our own beliefs.
So leaning in is the opposite of that.
Exactly. It's about holding back on judging or dismissing something new, even if it seems weird. You stay open-minded, do your own research, ask questions to understand what you don't get. Bartlett uses his own experience with Web 3.0 as an example. There was so much skepticism about it, but his company, Third Web, ended up being valued really high. He also tells this story about Shimon Peres, the Israeli prime minister. When Ronald Reagan visited a cemetery, it created this dissonance for Peres, but instead of letting it ruin their friendship, he chose to kind of hold on to that dissonance.
So it's about being curious, being humble, even when you come across ideas that you might not agree with at first.
Exactly. He encourages us to question our own beliefs, think about the possibility of being wrong, and actually explore the things we don't understand, instead of just dismissing them. He links this to taking risks, to achieve big things in life and love and your career. You have to lean into the unknown.
The next concept is really interesting. Ask, don't tell the question behavior effect. Sounds like a simple but powerful mind trick to get things done.
It is, yeah. It's all about how you phrase your intentions or requests. We all struggle with those self-improvement things, like eating healthier or exercising more.
So what's the question behavior effect?
Well, tons of research has shown that asking a question about a behavior is way more effective than just making a statement about it. Like, instead of saying, I will exercise 3 times this week, ask yourself, will I exercise 3 times this week?
It feels like the question makes you think more actively about it.
It does. And it's even stronger when you use yes or no questions. Plus, starting the question with will instead of can or could makes you feel more ownership, more commitment to the action. And the coolest thing is, it works best when the behavior aligns with your personal goals. So saying yes feels like you're getting closer to who you want to be.
So it's about tapping into that internal motivation with the right questions.
Totally. Bartlett's law is, if you want to create positive behavior, don't make statements, ask binary yes or no questions. People are more likely to answer yes if it will bring them closer to who they want to be, and once they answer yes, that yes is more likely to come true. And he sums it up so well. Ask questions of your actions, and your actions will answer.
Moving on to the 7th concept, never compromise your self-story. What exactly is this self-story?
It's basically the story you tell yourself about who you are, what you can do, how you handle challenges. Bartlett says this story has a huge impact on your actions and your success in life.
He uses a great anecdote to explain this, right?
Oh, yeah. The story of Chris Eubank Jr., the boxer. He's sparring with this huge Cuban Olympic heavyweight and gets knocked out of the ring. But his first thought is, I have to finish the ring. That story he tells himself, that belief in his own resilience, it instantly drives his next action. He gets back in the ring. Bartlett says, this self-story, it affects us even in small, everyday things.
It seems like the self-story is connected to mental toughness.
Definitely. Bartlett mentions this research done at West Point at their Beast Barracks program. Mental toughness, which is tied to your self-story and your grit, was a better predictor of success than physical strength, intelligence, or even leadership potential. Cadets who had higher grit scale scores, meaning they had stronger self-stories, they were way more likely to make it through the program.
And unlike our physical abilities, which might have limits, we can develop our self-story.
That's the key. He talks about being told as a kid, black people can't swim, and how that affected him for years. He also talks about stereotype threat, and how these negative stereotypes can mess with your performance. Studies show that even tiny reminders of negative stereotypes can make people perform worse.
So those external narratives can really mess up our internal stories.
Totally. Bartlett says our beliefs shape our thoughts and feelings, which then lead to actions. And those actions create the evidence that either supports or challenges our self-story. To change a negative self-story, you got to do things that create positive evidence. Pushing yourself at the gym, having that tough conversation, asking the extra question. Each time you choose to overcome a challenge, you're building a stronger self-narrative. He says, mental toughness comes principally from having a positive self-story. To build your self-story, you need evidence, and that evidence is derived from the choices you make in the face of adversity.
This next concept, never fight a bad habit, seems a bit odd. Why not tackle bad habits head-on?
Bartlett says directly fighting them often doesn't work and can make them come back even stronger. He uses his dad as an example, who was a secret smoker, then became an open smoker.
And he talks about this habit loop, right?
Yeah, he breaks it down into cue, routine, reward. The cue triggers the habit, the routine is the behavior itself, and the reward is that good feeling your brain gets from the routine. He mentions the book Hooked by Nir Eyal, which talks about how tech companies use this to make their products addictive. Our brains are wired for pleasure to avoid pain, so we're drawn to things that give us a reward. Research even shows that we react faster to getting a reward than to avoiding something bad.
So if we're wired for reward, why doesn't just suppressing a bad habit work?
When you try to not think about something, you're still focusing on it. Like studies show that smokers who tried not to think about smoking actually thought about it more. Bartlett compares it to a driving instructor telling you to avoid the curb, you end up steering towards it.
So shift the focus away from the bad habit.
Exactly. Instead, replace the bad habit with something good. When you feel that trigger coming, do the new thing instead. Bartlett says his dad quit smoking by sucking on lollipops instead of lighting up. He also stresses how important it is to feel good, overall less stress, enough sleep to change habits. And don't try to change too many habits at once. Willpower is limited. Fighting habits drains willpower and makes you more likely to relapse. It's like those crash diets are just not sustainable.
Replace, don't resist. It's like building new paths in your brain instead of just blocking the old ones.
That's a great way to put it.
This last one from the self is, always prioritize your first foundation. What's this all-important foundation?
Bartlett says your most important foundation is your health, both mental and physical. He compares it to a really valuable car. It needs regular maintenance to run well in the long term. Same with us. What we do now affects our health later.
And this really hit home for him during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, he had this realization after COVID. He admits that before he turned 27, he didn't really think about his health much, focused more on how he looked than how he felt. The pandemic really made him see how crucial health is.
It made a lot of us rethink things. All right, let's move on to pillar 2. The idea, starting with the power of absurdity. This sounds interesting, maybe even a bit counterintuitive, especially in business.
Yeah, this one's about using absurdity in your marketing, your storytelling. Bartlett talks about his first marketing company. They got a $300,000 investment. And he made this decision that seemed kind of dumb, leasing this huge 15,000 square foot warehouse for just 10 people.
And then he took it even further.
He did. Spent like 13,000 pounds on a giant blue slide in the middle of the office. Now, the slide wasn't really used much for sliding, but it became this amazing marketing tool. It said more about the company being different, young, innovative than any ad campaign could.
So sometimes the illogical things make the biggest impact.
That's it. Bartlett says a brand story is often shaped by these weird, seemingly useless things that they're linked to, more than by what their products actually do. He talks about Third Space Gym in London, which has this massive 100-foot climbing wall, a real conversation starter. And Brewdog, the beer company, they do these crazy things like showering people with beer, which help them grow super fast, even with a small budget.
It's about standing out, getting people talking.
Exactly. And he quotes Rory Sutherland, who said, "Meaning is conveyed by the things we do that are not in our own short-term self-interest, by the costs that we incur and the risks we take." The basic idea is being conventional, being super rational. It doesn't really say much about who you are, but a little absurdity. It can be a super powerful way to tell your story to stand out.
This next one is habituation is the enemy. We talked about habit earlier, but this seems different.
Yeah, this is about how habituation, when your brain tunes out things it sees repeatedly, can be a problem in marketing, communication, even how we see the world. Bartlett starts with this crazy story about Aaron Ralston, the guy who cut off his own arm after being trapped by a boulder for 6 days. He survived because his brain basically tuned out the pain.
And then he links this to more everyday stuff, right?
He does. He talks about Holocaust survivors in concentration camps, how they became desensitized to the horrific conditions, people not noticing a constant humming sound, even rats in a maze. Their brain activity goes down as they get used to it. The neuroscientist Eugene Sokolov has this model of habituation. He says the nervous system creates a model of a stimulus, and if it's not important, the model says to ignore it.
So our brains are always filtering out the repetitive, the unimportant stuff. How does this affect marketing?
That's where semantic satiation comes in. A word or phrase, if you hear it too much, it loses its meaning. It becomes like wallpaper. Bartlett uses the word revolutionary as an example. It's been used so much by politicians and advertisers that it doesn't mean much anymore. He talks about semantic generation, where meaning is created, and semantic satiation, where meaning is lost. Advertisers have to find that sweet spot where the word still has impact but hasn't become wallpaper yet.
So you got to keep your message fresh, unexpected.
Exactly. Bartlett's rule is avoid wallpaper at all costs by communicating in unrepetitive, unfiltered, and unconventional ways. He also warns about using emotional tactics too much because they can lose their power. He even says that swearing in book titles might be losing its effectiveness. And this leads to his next point. You must piss people off. Don't be afraid of alienating some with emotional, bold, or divisive approaches, as engaging a smaller percentage intensely can be more valuable than being indifferent to everyone.
This next one is psychological moonshots. Sounds intriguing, like getting a huge impact with small efforts.
That's exactly it. A psychological moonshot is a small investment, not always in the product itself, but in the experience around it, that makes people see the product as much better. Bartlett says it's often cheaper and more effective to focus on perception than on actually changing the reality. He talks about getting a haircut and feeling like it was rushed just because the barber didn't do his usual end-of-trim routine, even though the haircut itself is fine. It shows how small psychological cues can really change how we see things.
And he talks about Uber as a prime example, right?
Right. Yeah, Uber came from that frustration of waiting for taxis, never knowing when one would show up. They solved a psychological problem, basically. Uber Labs has actually done research into all these psychological principles that affect how satisfied customers are. Things like the peak-end rule, how we remember experiences based on the most intense part and the ending. Idleness aversion we hate being unproductive. Operational transparency, seeing how things work, makes us less uncertain. Uncertainty, anxiety, not having information makes us anxious. And the goal gradient effect, we're more motivated when we're close to finishing something. Uber used all these to change the whole transportation game.
And he talks about operational transparency using Japan Railway's Tessie cleaning crews as an example.
Exactly. People were worried about how clean the bullet trains were because of the short turnaround times. Instead of just hiring more cleaners, they did this psychological moonshot. They made the cleaning process a show. Cleaners wear bright red jackets. They do this synchronized 7-minute Shinkansen theater, bowing, cleaning really fast. It addressed the uncertainty, complaints went down, and the cleaners were proud of their work. It's about fixing the perception, not just the reality. Bartlett's rule here: do not wage a war on reality. Invest in shaping perceptions. Our truth is not what we see. It's the story we choose to believe.
This one seems a bit counterintuitive. Friction can create value. How can making things harder for the customer be a good thing?
This is about the idea that sometimes making things a little bit more difficult for the customer can make them want the product even more. Bartlett talks about Coca-Cola execs being surprised by Red Bull's success, even though it was in a smaller can and more expensive.
And then he gives some examples of this friction.
He does. The classic one is General Mills cake mix. At first, it was super simple. Just add water. Sales are terrible. Then they changed it so you had to add an egg. That tiny bit of extra effort, that friction, made people feel more involved, like they were really baking. Sales went through the roof. It's called the subtraction technique. He also talks about Fazenda, this steakhouse, where they bring you the raw meat. You have to wait longer, but it makes you feel more involved, in control. And those websites that compare flights and hotels, they slow down the search on purpose to make you think they're being thorough, and it keeps you from going to another site. Bartlett's Law. The frame matters more than the picture. How a product is presented drastically affects its perceived value.
That takes us right into the next idea. The frame matters more than the picture. It's all about how you present things.
Exactly. Bartlett says the frame, how something is presented, the context, has a huge impact on how valuable we think it is, even more than the picture, the actual thing itself. He tells a story about falling out of love with a clothing brand after seeing a video of their mass production process. It wasn't about where the clothes were made, but the clash between the brand image and the reality.
And he uses Whoop, the wearable, as an example.
Yeah, Whoop is this health tracker that's done really well, even though it's competing with huge companies. And they're great at framing. They present the data in a way that gives you insights, tells you what to do. Bartlett mentions that optical illusion with the arrowheads, where the lines around them make them look different sizes, even though they're the same. Framing isn't about lying. It's about showing your product in the best possible light, like saying 90% lean instead of 10% fat. The bottom line is, reality is often just perception, and context is everything.
Okay, on to use Goldilocks to your advantage. We all know about Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold. How does that apply to business?
In business, it's about giving people choices, and the middle option tends to be the most popular. Bartlett talks about looking for a house, and his estate agent showed him 3 options. Guess which one he went for? The middle one. The agent later told him he did that on purpose, saying, never show people only one option.
So it's about giving options to steer people toward what you want them to choose.
Right. He gives the example of Panasonic back in '92. They had 3 microwaves at different prices, the middle-priced one. Sales went crazy. Panasonic ended up with like 60% of the market share. Bartlett's Law is, use Goldilocks to your advantage by offering economy, standard, and premium versions of your product to influence perception of your standard offering. And the quote that sums it up, the context creates the value.
The 17th idea is let them try and they will buy. It's all about experience and ownership.
This one's about the endowment effect. People value things more when they feel like they own them. Bartlett talks about his niece getting a present and refusing to give it back.
And there's research behind this, right?
Oh, yeah. There's this study in '84. People got lottery tickets, and they valued them way higher than the money they could get for them. They didn't want to trade. Then there's the Duke University basketball tickets. People who won the lottery valued them at like $2,400, but people who didn't win would only pay $175. This whole possessiveness thing is built into us. They even did a study with chimps showing the same thing with food.
So even the feeling of ownership, even temporarily, makes things seem more valuable. He ties this to his own business experiences.
He does. His marketing companies never had a sales team. They grew because they told captivating stories, letting potential clients see themselves benefiting from their services. It created that sense of ownership in their minds before they even signed up. He even mentions he has a short attention span and prefers stories over pitches.
This last idea is a big one. Fight for the first 5 seconds. Especially now, with everyone's attention spans shrinking, that sounds super important.
Absolutely crucial. This is all about how those first few seconds are everything when it comes to getting and keeping people's attention. Bartlett brings up Mr. Beast, the YouTuber who's a master at this. He starts his videos with this super compelling promise or something visually crazy that hooks you right away. Like he's got videos where he recreates the sets from Squid Game with $456,000 prize.
And he points out how short our attention spans have become, especially online.
Yeah, attention spans are shrinking all the time, and there's this huge drop-off in viewers after the first few minutes of a video, those first 5 seconds. They basically decide whether people will keep watching.
He's even got a personal story about how important those first seconds are.
He talks about re-editing a client's video that had already gone viral. They just changed the first 5 seconds, made it more engaging, and the number of people who watched past 10 seconds went up by 150%. His law here is, Aggressively, passionately, and provocatively design those first 5 seconds to be thumb-stoppingly compelling, annoyingly magnetic, or emotionally engaging. Urgently get to the most compelling promise, point, or provocation. Earn the right to attention within those first 5 seconds.
All right, now let's get into pillar 3, the team. And we'll start with sweat the small stuff. It's all about that idea of continuous improvement.
Exactly. It's about focusing on those tiny details, what's called the Kaizen philosophy. Bartlett believes that his podcast's success, even though it might not be perfect in every way, is because they sweat the small stuff more than others.
And he gives examples of what those small details are for his podcast.
Well, yeah, things like finding out what music a guest likes and